All right, welcome back, everyone, and good evening to you. Um, this is week number 8, and we're going to resume our discussion on JSP. So last week we went through some material about Java database connectivity. We learned how to connect to our database, which was MySQL. And we learned how to use JSP to run some queries, get some results, which hopefully you will be able to do for the part 2 of your assignment. So in the last couple of weeks, we talked about JSP in detail. And what we learned in the last couple of weeks um, were the following. So we learned in order to write code, Java code in JSP, first of all, we can use scripting elements, right? So with scripting elements, what you can do to make things easy is if you are a Java programmer and you would like to write Java code, um, what you can do is to use these symbols, and within these symbols you can write you can write Java code, right? So if you're comfortable writing Java codes, scriptlets is your best option. You can write print statements, you can declare variables, you can declare methods, and so on. However, if you're not a Java programmer and you want to use JSP with HTML, you're mainly an JSP or H/HTML programmer, and you're not very familiar with Java, you may find action elements a better option for you. Okay. So we learned how to use action elements. Um, for example, we used JSP use bean. That was one of the action elements we tried last week. We tried JSP include, for example. Is there anybody who remembers other action elements that we used in the last couple of weeks? Any other action elements that we used? You make this smaller. Other than use bean and include, did we use any other action elements? Anybody remembers what we used? Any tags? Okay, if you remember, let me know. The other thing that we used in JSP was directives, right? And we use directives for giving extra information to our container. So for example, we used, do you remember any particular directive that we used? Remember import, for example? We used import. We have other directives. If you remember, we have language, right? We provide some extra information to our JSP container, and we can actually use language and import in one single directive. If you are using Eclipse, you would know that Eclipse does this by default automatically. You don't need to add the language directive, for example. Okay, so today we're going to learn something new. Okay, and what we're going to learn is called JSTL, or Java Standard. Let me make this smaller. Java Standard Tag Library. So with what we're going to learn today, you can pretty much do all Java programming with JSTL. Okay, so action elements, directives are somehow limited. Okay, they give you plenty of functionality to use Java to write tags that are that will do what Java does actually, but they don't give you all the functionalities. With JSTL, we can do a lot of things, and there are a couple of main categories of JSTL tags that we're going to learn today. Okay, so without further ado, let me get started with today's lecture notes. If you have any questions during the class, please do let me know. Okay, so here is the evolution of JSP that we have looked at before. Let me see if there are any questions. Here is the evolution of JSP we have looked at before. We talked about scriptlets and expressions. Okay, expressions are used to pass something to the print method if you want to display something on the browser. We talked about standard action. Well, actually, something I forgot to mention was that we also talked about expression language. Okay. We also talked about expression language. So expression language was basically an evolution to standard action and scriptlets and expressions. It gave you an extra functionality. If you remember, we discussed that with standard action, you cannot display a property of a property. So if you remember, we talked about, for example, if we have a class called person, and that person class has another class called dog, and that dog has a property called name. Okay, we cannot access that using, we cannot access the name property. Sorry, we cannot access the name property using a standard action. Okay. So we learned that using expression language, or EL, we can access property of a property, which made it easier for us to do certain things. So today we're going to talk about the tag library. If you are using Eclipse, if you are using the latest version of Eclipse, you do not need to install it on your PC, okay? However, if you are using an older version, you may have to go through the very short installation, which I'm going to uh, take you through. So, as I said, JSTL stands for Java Standard Tag Libraries. It's a collection of tags, custom tags, and they're developed by this community called JCP. They allow you to program JSP, to write Java codes inside your JSP, um, rather than using a scriptlets, right? So with scriptlets, you need to know Java, but JSTL is an entirely different way of writing programs, which eventually gets converted to Java, but you don't have to write Java code yourself. Um, it can nearly do everything that a JSP scriptlet can do for you. There are still some limitations, but it's certainly an improvement to uh, standard action. So just to give you an idea of what this looks like, on the left we have scriptlets. On the right is Java standard tag library. Okay, so with scriptlets, you're writing Java code. Again, the disadvantage is if you want to have a space, uh, display a breaking line, you need to, close the tag and open it again, which may not be very pretty or very convenient, as you can see, because we want to write something in HTML, we have to close the tag and then open it again just to close the for loop. However, on the other hand, we have JSTL. You can see things are looking much more neat. We have, so this is basically a JSTL tag. I will explain to you how this C came about. It's a name that we choose by using a directive. But ignoring that, for now, you can see everything is written in a tag. And we have another JSTL to print the value of the variable in a for loop. So if you are running an older version of Eclipse, or if you have an old My Eclipse, you will need to get the jar files. If you have MySQL, you can set the version of your JSTL, but since I'm using the latest version of Eclipse, I don't need to do this step. In fact, this tab does not even exist. So as you can see on the left, you will need to add 2 jar files. Okay, but if you are having, if you're using Eclipse, the latest version, these jar files are already added for you. So if you go to your projects, you will see, if you open the libraries, you will see that JSTL library is already existing. So you don't really need to worry about adding the jar files. Okay, so that's about installation. And this is what we have already learned. Okay, so we have scripting elements, directives, and standard action. Okay, so with standard action, I was asking you if you know any other tags, and here is the answer. We have set property, get property, param, include forward, etc., etc. For directives, mainly we discussed page directive, includes directive. Today, we're going to have to use this directive, which is a tag lib directive, in order to use JSTL. So we can classify JSTL tag libraries into 5 different categories. First, we have core tags. These tags are commonly used, most frequently used than other tags. Then if you want to format your text, string, integer, floats, like if you want to set the number of floating points, or if you want to format your string in a certain way, you will use the formatting tags. You can also you can also use JSTL for doing, typical SQL transactions. Then if you are manipulating XML files, you can use XML tags. And finally, there are some JSTL functions, um, that we will learn at the end of the lecture. But most importantly, we will spend a lot of time on core tags today because they're most frequently used, and most of the functionality that you will need for your homework as well are actually in core tags. Okay, as you can see on this table, there's a column called recommended prefix, because you can change these names. It's up to you what name you choose to define core tags, formatting tags, XML and database access tags. But conventionally, these prefixes are preferred, and we will adhere to naming convention for the sake of our lecture today. So let's get started with core tags. In order to be able to use core tags, you will need to add this directive on the top of your JSP. Um, there is a URI to this location, and this is the prefix that you choose. So as I said, we're going to use the recommended prefixes, but you can give it any names that you like. Okay. So so with the tag lib directives, JSP allows you to define custom JSP tags. Custom means it's user defined. Okay, so you can define your own tags. Um, and this is the syntax that you will need to write this directive. You have a taglib URI, um, and then the prefix of your choice. So these are the main core tags that we will use. So the general tags, we have cout, which is used for printing or displaying things on the browser. Setting for setting variables or attributes. It's similar to set property standard action. And then if you're removing something, we use the remove tag. And then we have, for error handling, we have the catch tag that we will see later on in the slides today. Conditional tags are if, choose, when, and otherwise. If is very similar to the if and else condition. But if you want to use something like switch, then we will use choose, when, otherwise together. For doing loops, for each loops works like a for loop. Um, And then we have for tokens. If we have tokens that are comma separated or separated by parentheses and so on. And then you have some URL related tags for doing simple things like redirecting the clients from one JSP to another and so on. Okay, so let's get started with the looping tags, and we will have some demos for this. So the first one we will do is a for each tag. If you want to use scriptlets, it won't be as neat as JSTL, but still doable. This is the main syntax with all the options. We may not use all the options, but certainly we will use some of them. So for each, and then we have a var, which is the name of a variable. If you are looping through a collection, then you will need to set the items attribute. Var status, it's an interesting attribute. It allows you to have access to certain information about about the location of the processor during the loop. We will see some examples of this later in today's slides. And then begin and end and step. Okay, so these are all the options that you can use with your for each. So the first example that we're going to demonstrate is to loop through some integer numbers. Okay, so let me just open Eclipse and create a new project to do that. So launch Eclipse. Okay, so let me create a new project. We call it, let's call it JSTL demo. Everything is set. So next, that's fine. Next, I don't need web.xml. Yeah, let's finish this. Okay, so let me create a JSP file. Open my source, add a JSP file somewhere. JSP try. Maybe call it JSP tags. Next. Okay. So as I said earlier, the first thing before we can use JSTL is to add a directive. And where I'm going to add the directive, I can just add it right after the first one. Okay, so that's going to be this format. And instead of page, this time I have tag lib. Okay. With tag lib, we have a URI. So if you can actually use the autocomplete from your Eclipse, that can help you. So we know there is one URI. The URI for that is http java.sun.com. Actually, I have written this somewhere, so I'm just reading from that. You don't really need to memorize this. Okay, JSTL core. And you better not to, because you might make some spelling mistakes. Prefix, because for my first example, I'm going to use the core tags. So the prefix for that is going to be C. But again, as I said before, you can give it any name that you like. All right, so we want to do very simple things. So let me just change the title here. JSP tag library. I'm going inside the body. Let me just add a header. Display. What is a good name for it? Looping with JSTL. Okay, gonna add just a line. And if you remember the format, we have to use C, right? Because we said the prefix is C. So once you add this prefix here, because you are pointing to the core, right? Eclipse gives you all the options related to core. So you can see we have catch, for each for token, if, import. These are all the core tags from JSDL. For the purpose of a simple loop, I only need a for each. So now let's see what variables, what attributes are required. First one, we must have a var. Okay, if you want to do a simple for loop with an variable, I'm gonna give it name I for index. We will have to tell it where to start because I'm just going to print 10 numbers. So the beginning is going to be 1, and then we have to specify end. And let's say we print 10 numbers. Now inside, what we have to do is we just have to print something. And in order to make things look nicer, I'm going to use a list ul, which is going to contain our for each. And then once we can access our index, I'm going to add a list item here. List item here, I'm going to use EL. This is expression language, right? So with EL, I can simply say I like this. And this is going to print the value of I. So actually, this is it. I don't know why it's complaining here. There is nothing wrong. Okay, let me just run this and see if it works fine. So I'm gonna run this now. Okay, there's no problem. Sometimes Eclipse has this bug, and by mistake, it underlines some statements that have no problems. Okay, so let me stop Tomcat, and we go back. And we'll see what else we can do with JSDL. So if I go back here, let me just copy this whole block. Next thing I'm going to do, let's say we want to print only the even numbers. If I want to print the even numbers, the easiest way is to add another attribute called step and give it a number 2, looping with using step attributes. Let's print this one, display this as well. Okay, so this attribute may come in handy as well sometimes. So this is a very simple thing you can do with JSTL if you want to loop through, and it's very useful. So let me go back to the slide and see um, other JSTL, other tags. So we saw this one already, but the steps are provided for you if you want to do it later at home. We have seen these. Okay, the next thing we can do is we can go through arrays. Okay, if you have some arrays and you want to go through them, you can actually do that. But in order to do that, I want to create an attribute um, in your I want to create an attribute added to your request object, and then we access it from JSP. So what I'm going to do is I add a servlet. Let me call this servlet make just collection. Okay, collection next fish. Okay, so we want to see how we can loop through a collection. I'm going to go inside do get. I don't need this line. So I'm going to create an array of string. We call it words. Let's add some words to it. Let's say name, surname, age. Okay, any words. And then I'm going to create an set an attribute to the request object. Request as set attribute. What are the parameters? First, you have to give it a name. I can call it anything. Words attribute. And then I will attach associate words array to words attribute. What is the next thing I have to do? The next thing is to forward the client to the JSP where we will eventually display it. Okay, so that would be request get request dispatcher. What is the name of our JSP? As JSP hyphen tags.jsp. And then I'm gonna say, I'm gonna do it in one line, forward. We have to pass request and response. Okay, so we need to remember this name because we're going to access it from our JSP. So let's go back to JSP now. The next thing we want to do is Control C. Let's say display. Looping through array JSTL. Okay, so this is going to be simple as well. We have to access that attribute, but we have to know the name of the attribute. So I'm going to say C again for each. This time, the variable, what should be the name of this variable? We can find it from here. It's words underline attribute. What else do we need? We need to know items. Actually, I made a mistake here, so I will tell you later. Items is where we have to give that name. So the items will be words attributes. And when you write this name, you have to use expression language. Please remember that. Otherwise, you will not be able to access this. Because it's an attribute, we need to use expression language. So remember that. This is any name that you give. So I'm going to call it words. Next thing, if we have a UL, you can end it here. And then we will need an LI. And we simply say, again, use expression language. Words. So better call it word. And there is an extra, okay, brackets. I don't need that. Okay, I think this is it. So this is the attributes we got from the servlet. So one thing you need to remember, if you run this file now, it's not going to work. Okay, because remember we create the attribute here. So let me just run this one and see if this is going to work. It is not working, so let's go and check what is wrong with it. Collection, check this name. That sounds correct. So let's see what the problem is. Can anybody identify what the problem is? Words. Oh, I think I figured out. Can anybody else see what the problem is? There is something wrong here. I think it's kind of obvious, but my question is, can anybody see this problem? Can you find where the problem is? It's very obvious, I think. So can you tell me what is it? Oh, okay, let me. Item? No. No, no, the problem is something else. Have a look. Have a look carefully. Items is actually correct. Items, this one is correct. There's no problem with this. Look closer. The problem is about closing tag and ending tags. Right? Is this in the proper place? No, I have to go down here, right? So earlier for each was closed on the first line. So expression language has no idea what word is actually. So let's go back and run it again. Maybe this time it'll be okay. Yeah, so we can access our array from here. So this one's fine. Let me go back to the slides. If you have any questions, do let me know. Okay. So we saw these array. So let's discuss more tags. Cout is another very useful tag. We're going to see how this works. So it displays the results of an expression. It's very similar to this, the expression that we used. There is a difference, however, with the cout, you have more flexibility. You can use this dot notation to access properties. Very similar to the way you used to access properties in expression language. Okay. Here is the syntax for C:\out. We have value. Um, there is escape XML. I'm going to explain to you what this means. We have default. Um, and this is something very useful. Let's see how this actually works. So let me go back to Eclipse and see how cout works. Let me just declare a variable somewhere. Let's say we want to declare a variable here. How do we declare variable in JSP? We can either use scriptlets, right? Or we can use this declaration style of scriptlet. There is a subtle difference. With this one, we are going to declare a global variable. However, if I get this out, then you will have a local variable. In this case, it doesn't make a difference, but in other circumstances, you need to be careful whether you need a global or a local variable. So I'm going to create a variable called user, and initially I'm going to set it to null, no value for it. We're going to see how we use cout to basically print this. However, I want to try expression first. Okay, I'm going to say the value of user is, so let me just put it within quotation. Let's say the name of the user is, then I'm going to add user. Okay, that's using expression. Why is there a problem here? I don't think there is any problem here. This is just Eclipse's mistake, I guess. Now what we want to do is, let's say we want to use cout. Say the name, oh, sorry, cout, okay. With cout, we can say value, and then we will have to use expression language user. Actually, we don't need ending and closing tags. Okay, let me give it a name, my name, and h2 using cout sync expression and cout. Okay, so when you have a value, when your variable has some value, using cname, using cout and expression is pretty much the same. So here I'm going to say the name of the user is space. Okay, so let's run this. And what else we need to do? Add a breaking line here. So we run this now. Oops, we have to run collection. Okay, you can see that the first time it's printing something, but the next one is not printing anything. So can you figure out what the problem is? Any idea? Have a look at it. The name of the user is. There is Eclipse is complaining here, but I think this one is fine. Anybody knows why this one is not being printed? Any idea? So let me print this again. So we have the one that's printed here, and the next one is not printed. So let's go back and try to figure out. What we can do is actually set the value using cset. So cset, I'm going to use cset var equals user value okay, let's have another try. Okay, yeah, so you can see that when you use a cset, you can set the value. Let me make this look a little bit better. So I'm going to add an HR here. If you have any questions with this, let me know. So for cout to work, we need to set the variable using cset. Okay. And this BR, I was actually using it in the wrong place. So this is going to be here. All right. We will have a very short break, and when we come back, I'm going to teach you some other attributes that you can use with this cset and cout. If you have any questions, please let me know. So let's have a quick break.